Welcome to the Kind Heartfulness podcast, exploring the inner reaches of the heart and mind, brought to you by Rangsheng Yeshigomde, Germany-Austria, and your host, Erric Solomon.
Welcome to the Kind Heartfulness podcast. And today we're going to have as our guest Andy Karr. Andy wrote a book that I just have to say I absolutely loved reading. It's called Into the Mirror, A Buddhist Journey Through Mind, Matter, and the Nature of Reality. And in this book, Andy gives a beautiful overview of Buddhist practice, Mahayana Buddhist practice, as well as teachings on the Yogacaran view. But what I found especially impressive, I've never seen in any other book, is he takes on most of, if not all, the most important modern philosophical ideas about the nature of reality and applies Buddhist reasoning to them. And I think it's a masterwork. And yes, so I read the book at the end of June and just felt like I had to meet him and get him on to the podcast. So let me tell you a little bit about Andy. He actually is originally a student of Suzuki Roshi. And then after he passed away, he went to study with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And then more recently with the great Mahamudra Master Khenpo Tsultrim Gyaltso. And now Andy has written 3 books, Contemplating Reality, which is a fabulous series of investigations into the nature of mind and the phenomenal world. His second book is the practice of contemplative photography, which he wrote with Michael Wood. And then finally, that brings us to his latest book. And Andy mainly likes to study and teach the Mahayana view and meditation and Mahamudra. And so without any further ado, let's meet Andy and explore his latest book. So Andy Karr, welcome to Kind Heartfulness podcast.
Well, thank you. Thanks for doing this. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, me too. I got very excited when I read your new book, Into the Mirror, and I couldn't wait to have you on. And was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about why you wrote the book or what you were hoping people would get when they read this book.
Well, I think I have been concerned about how Buddhism engages with modernity for quite a while, probably a decade or more. And I guess there's 2 aspects to that concern. One is we carry modernity with us when we become Buddhists because it's so deeply entrenched in our culture. And the other is that I'm concerned about how we as Buddhists can speak to modern people. And, one of the hallmarks of the modern age is materialism, not just consumerism, but like really deep-seated belief in stuff and not much faith in mind. We'll say things like, oh, it's all in your head, meaning it's insignificant. And so many of the interventions people have of all sorts to try to get rid of suffering and become happy are about stuff, whether it's pharmaceutical stuff or psychotherapeutic stuff or possession stuff. It always, not always, but it mostly seems to come back to materialism. I don't want to have too one-sided perspective on the modern world. It's not like, oh, the modern world is crap. The modern world is fantastic, but it's also crap. I have 2 facts that I like to cite when I'm talking about this, because I think it's important to have an intelligent, balanced view of modernity, not just a critical one. In the last 100 years, the human lifespan has doubled. And that's thanks to modern science, medicine, public health. And it's three things basically have caused us to double our lifespan. One is antibiotics, another is vaccines, and a third is germ theory, particularly the pasteurization of milk. These three and the public health that made people aware of them have literally given us, on the average, a second lifespan. That's amazing. That's fantastic. On the other hand, we have developed the ability to wipe out the species, wipe out life on the planet through nuclear weapons. Now we have artificial intelligence, which some feel is threatening humanity. The UN panel on species extinction has forecast that up to 1 million species of plants and animals may go extinct in the next few years. So modernity has both this incredible positive side and this incredible terrible side. And at the core of that is materialism.
So how do you think, you say it's a modern problem. So I think I like that. There's modern and maybe pre-modern, and Buddhist philosophy, you can say, comes from pre-modern society. How has materialism changed, say, from the time of pre-modern society to now? And I mean, why do you see it as more of a problem now?
The incredible power of science in predicting so many phenomena has given people this sense that science, which is fundamentally materialist, is all powerful. All knowledge has to be scientific. Now, there are people who, of course, are anti-science. We have a whole part of our culture that is anti-science, but even those people are watching the weather reports and deciding what to wear based on what the meteorologists are saying. They're taking the antibiotics when they get sick. Of course, there's some who are extreme enough that not doing even that. But by and large, even the anti-science folk believe in the power of science.
Yeah, they're going on their phone and posting on Facebook and
Exactly
the anti-science screed.
Yeah,
I find that ironic too.
So the point is that the culture of science, the culture of materialism, based on believing that anything that's real must be independently observable and verifiable by scientific third-party, third-person perspectives. That's what's real. The mind doesn't fit in that category. So materialism either devalues or in some cases denies the existence of the mind. There are people who will argue that the mind is an illusion without saying what that illusion is appearing to.
Yes. Yes. But they say the mind is an illusion, but that what that illusion is based on physical processes. Usually they say in the brain or something like that.
Yeah, so I think, as Buddhist practitioners, we have to look at what these things mean. So when we say processes in the brain, do we ever directly experience brains? Don't think so. We may, you can hit someone in the head and say, okay, you've done something to their brain, and then there's an experience that comes out of that, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But do we ever experience the brain? I don't think so. I don't experience my brain. I experience a lot of thought, emotions, and so on. You can say, okay, well, surgeons experience the brain when they cut open your skull. But all they're doing is experiencing visual perceptions. And they have models to explain things. Science produces theories and models out of observations. Now, observations are clearly mental because there's some observer involved, but the models are also mental. These conceptual models or mathematical models are things that only exist in the minds of mathematicians and scientists. And then we lay people inherit some maybe primitive or sophisticated versions of these models and talk about, how our brains are affecting our behavior and so on. But these are always on the level of conceptual models, things that occur in our minds and in the scientists' minds. And they don't exist in nature. They're not part of the furniture of reality.
I think this is a very subtle argument, very profound argument you're making. Do you think you could say just one more time, maybe a slightly different way, so that maybe some of the people listening who didn't get it on the first run can understand it?
Thank you, Eric.
Well, this point is really, really important that you're making. And so I want to make sure that our listeners get a chance to fully grok it.
Yeah, no, you're right. It tends to be a little subtle. I mean, the point is trying to make it a little bit more clear. Yeah. Our experience of our world, of our environment, is a mental experience. That's what the word experience means, that experience by definition is something that appears to our minds. So we believe we have a model of reality, that there's something causing this experience that is solid and external and exists whether we observe it or not.
Yes.
Brains are part of that model of what reality is like. We have all these experiences of our concepts of the world, experiences of our projections of the world, our projections of our brains, our projections of what is, quote, physical. But at the end of the day, we always have to come back to our experience, not to anything extra mental. We can never prove that there's anything beyond our experience causing us to have the experience. We believe there is because things are orderly. There's a certain pattern to experience. And so to explain that, we say, oh yeah, well, it's because there's a material world that's out there. That's why it's predictable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the materialists would say something like, when I say the materialist, for the benefit of our audience, I mean, a normal scientist would say, well, that's because when I do an experiment, it's repeatable. I get the same result every time. And so therefore, I conclude that there's some phenomena out there that's causing this.
Yeah. But it's true that it's repeatable and predictable, and that our models work really, really well, allowing us to have incredible power over nature, to create incredible machines, incredible public health, things like that. But to say that it all works because there's something that's real outside of our experience is another leap. It's a further assumption.
Hmm.
It's actually an ideology.
I think people sometimes call it scientism.
Yeah. Or physicalism.
Physicalism, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, in day-to-day reality, to watch the weather report and believe that, oh yeah, it's probably going to rain because, the weather map says that, and, the little icon on my phone says that. I can believe that, and you can work with that. Where it becomes problematic is that we have so many of these projections that are mental about our lives, about things other than the upcoming weather.
Yes.
Like friends and enemies and good and bad, and all the ideas we have about the causes of happiness and sorrow are also mental.
Mm.
And we get lulled into believing, we are hypnotized by these projections about reality, to believe our own projections, to believe that all these mental images that come up about what's going to make me happy, what's going to make me unhappy, we believe that those are real, that that's part of the furniture of reality, when in fact, these are also our own minds appearing in this way. So, the physicalism or the materialism itself is really not that harmful. But because we're not aware of its nature, because we don't recognize when it's happening to us that we're projecting all this, a lot of really insidious projections we believe equally, things that lead us to seek suffering and avoid happiness. And kind of the biggest one is to think that the mind isn't that important, and that stuff is the most important thing. That if I get the right stuff and avoid the wrong stuff, I'm going to be happy and everything's going to be cool.
I think that's true, but I think a lot of the younger people that I meet, especially in the courses I give, they would say, no, I get having stuff isn't so important, but experiences are what's important. And so they try, if they get any money, they spend it on having a special kind of experience, going on a travel to a remote place, or some kind of extreme sport for the thrill of it, that kind of thing. So how is that different? Is that different?
Well, it's the same in the sense that it's one type of stuff that you go out and buy and you bring home. Mm-hmm. But it's another type of stuff when you go on a safari. You're looking for safari stuff. You're looking for elephants. If you're going skydiving, you're looking for particular types of experiences that come from certain stuff. The phenomena of jumping out of an airplane, that's stuff. Mm-hmm. It's another accumulation. You're not just working directly with your mind.
Okay. So to summarize, I think where we've got to so far is that you wrote this book because you see that the all-pervasive materialism of modern society makes an extra thick obstacle, can I say it that way, a thick obstacle to working with our own mind.
Exactly.
Okay. And so, I mean, this whole podcast is in some sense or another about this subject of working with our own mind, or our own heart as well.
Yeah.
So where do we go from there?
Yeah. So that's really a good summary of where we've gotten to in this discussion, because this is all kind of preliminary. This is like, okay, you have this cultural baggage that you haven't probably examined. So we're going to examine that a bit. at least to point out that there is such baggage that you might recognize, and you might start to think more about the mind itself. But then there's a whole journey to take from there of how you might work with your mind. And for me, and in this book, what I've tried to do, I find that the Mahayana teachings are extremely helpful and extremely valuable, and often in the Tibetan tradition, which I come from and you come from, kind of overlooked. They're not as prominent most of the time as some of the Vajrayana teachings or even the foundational vehicle teachings. So for me, the Mahayana journey has been extremely helpful and important. And I tried to lay out in fairly simple ways what that journey can be like. One of the things that happened when I was writing the book was I got to this point in the book about halfway in, and I thought, well, I should really describe how the Mahayana developed. And I thought I knew that, and I started looking at that and realized I didn't have a clue. I have these vague ideas about the origin of the Mahayana, which are kind of mythic, the traditional explanations of Nagarjuna going down to the Naga realm and getting the Prajnaparamita Sutras. So I looked further into it and was very surprised to find, at least my perspective is that the Mahayana was much more of a natural evolution of the teachings in India than a radical departure. And so I tried to understand more the through line of how, at the time of the Buddha, which we really don't know very much about, we have kind of a received perspective on that, but we don't have any, we don't have the recordings.
Yeah.
But my sense is that the teachings from his time evolved in a very natural way, that people's realization at the Buddha's realization, his students' realization was probably identical to the realizations of the great masters of today. But the way they talked about it and the way they expressed it was very different, because first of all, they were in a different culture, but also as time went on, the ways of explaining things evolved. So, when you get to the Mahayana in India, it turns out that probably there were viharas, monasteries, that had both foundational vehicle monks and Mahayana monks living side by side, same institution. They all took the same monastic vows. There were no separate Mahayana vows. They might have different understandings, but they were all part of the same mishpucha, as we say in Yiddish, the same group, same family.
Yes,
it wasn't like they were Protestant reformists revolutionizing against the Catholics or something like that. So that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And then the more I went into it and the more I was working with the Mahayana teachings, the more sense I got that even the kind of evolution between the Madhyamaka, the middle way tradition that Nagarjuna initiated and or was the spokesperson for, and the later evolution of the Yogacara teachings, those were not competing schools at the time. They were not battling against each other. Asanga and Vasubandhu didn't think of themselves as rebelling against the Madhyamakas. They were trying to refine and develop further the same trajectory that Nagarjuna was developing.
Yeah, I mean, I've wondered about that. It's an interesting point you make, and it's something I actually quite liked about your book, because often you see the way people present it as if there's some kind of conflict. And for myself, my own, limited understanding of this subject and the way I've come to it as a practitioner is actually completely the opposite. It's like Nagarjuna has one role in my spiritual life, and that's more about actually, honestly, my intellectual aspect. And then for actual practice, the Yogacharan view is, and you can even say negotiating ordinary life, like when people piss me off, for example. I find the Yogacharan view is really, really useful in that moment of being very upset.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I have a similar sense of it. I think that, this is an evolution of insights that build on each other rather than conflict with each other. And I really like viewing it that way. I find it much more helpful for my own practice.
Yes.
The Tibetan tradition, I think there's a lot of tribalism in the Tibetan world that gets into,
and a little bit of politics.
And it started in India.
Yeah.
That and one theory is that when the great Mahaviharas like Nalanda developed, and there was patronage for scholars, that people were competing for patronage, and the scholars had to have strong points of view to win patrons and things. So maybe that was a reason that these things started to take on this kind of competitive.
So you win a debate and you get all the students.
That's right.
So there's a lot right there.
Yeah.
How does this inform our practice? I mean, this is all. Is this just a heady, important but heady exploration that then we set aside and then go to our cushion, or how does it really inform our practice?
I guess I have to talk very personally about that.
Oh, I wish you would.
My own experience as a Vajrayana student has been often that I felt like I'm doing my best. I'm really trying to master these practices and so on, but I really don't know what I'm doing. And it's more about going back and working with some of these Mahayana investigations that pointed out why the Vajrayana works, what it's about. And they go hand in hand with this examination of materialism, because the Vajrayana, in fact, all of Buddhism essentially comes down to some appreciation of emptiness and luminosity. And that's described differently in the different vehicles. If you don't have any sense of this inner spaciousness, and the fact that within that inner spaciousness, there's all these things that appear, thoughts, emotions, and so on, it's hard to make much progress on the path. And I think the Mahayana gives both an intellectual framework for understanding that and tools for exploring it experientially.
So I think for some people, when they encounter some of the logic and reasoning of that you find in Mahayana, it seems a little bit overwhelming, and they go, can I just go back to the cushion and meditate? I mean, how much do we have to really do? I mean, what do you say to someone like that?
I don't think that's some people. I think that's almost everyone.
Yes, fair enough.
And yeah, it's gnarly stuff.
Yeah.
And it's challenging. And I think, what I find helpful is that there are ways of making it experiential and interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's too intellectual, people really miss the point. One of the things that I learned from one of my main teachers, Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso Rinpoche, is that the more you are doing this kind of intensive analytical work, the more you need to relax.
Yeah.
And this type of analysis tends to make us uptight. One of the things that Khenpo Rinpoche would do when he was teaching Madhyamaka or Yogacara or something like that, he had all these toys that people would give him, and he'd have them up on his throne. And I remember many times watching him wind up all these mechanical toys on his throne while the translation was going on. And you see all these little toys running around on his throne in front of him, and he's having a great time. And it just opened things up and relaxed people. So that, instead of, oh, we're studying this really important, serious stuff. This is Nagarjuna, the fundamental wisdom of the middle way. I've got to really bear down and understand. It's like, there has to be a little playfulness along with all the intellectualizing. Otherwise, it really does become deadly. So I tried in the book to find little literary devices to try to create that sense of looseness and inquisitiveness about these analyses, these practices, because really, unless you loosen up, you won't get the experiential part of this. It'll just be intellectual. So I think that's really, for me, the key is very much analyze, rest, keep a sense of humor. Don't let it drive you a little crazy, but have a sense of humor about that.
Yes.
And then it can work, and you get glimpses of insight, and you get a few glimpses of insight, and that's very conducive to wanting to do more.
I have to say that's a really beautiful way to put it. I still think for a lot of people, I mean, myself, when I was a computer programmer, but when I first started in Buddhism, which actually I was still a teenager, but it was like a way to switch that brain that's always grasping onto knowing stuff off. And then, so I did find, like studying Nagarjuna, and actually it's a way to use that thing that I do in computer programming, except it's for Buddhism. So that was kind of cool. But on the other hand, I was just one more thing I was holding. So how do you break that? How do you, I think it's even to go how we started this whole thing about materialism. We're just holding that so tightly. So even in a funny, subtle way, studying this emptiness stuff is a new kind of materialism, perhaps an absence of, but it's still.
It can be.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure. We can get very addicted to our intellects and think, oh yeah, if I solve this, I'm going to really be smart. Yeah, no, that's true. It can go that way. But, if you're not getting some insight into your own mind as you do this, it's not working. If it remains in the realm of the intellectual, it's not really doing its job. The eighth Karmapa, Mikyo Dorje, has a great line in one of his Madhyamaka commentaries. He said, Nagarjuna's method is like ordering an executioner to kill themselves. So, that's when it's working. It's working when the intellect kind of breaks down and you get a glimpse of openness.
I think that says it all.
Isn't that a great line?
Yeah, yeah. And also, I loved in your book that you ended with this quote of Trungpa Rinpoche. I'll say it. You're falling without a parachute or without anything to grasp. That's the bad news. The good news is there's no ground. Which is also, in a funny way, the bad news too.
Yeah.
Because you want to grasp something, at least if there's ground. It's one of my favorite. I heard that somehow. I heard that. Unfortunately, I never met Trungpa Rinpoche. I was just slightly too young, but that was one of the first things I heard from him, and I just thought that's great. So, is there any last thing you would like to say? Something I might have missed, or you wish you'd like people to know?
I can't really think of anything else. Love this conversation. It's really great to talk with you and to be able to talk about this particular material, because I have found it very potent, very helpful for my own experience, and do want to share it, because I think, a lot of people have gotten turned off by the Mahayana philosophical material. A lot of people haven't even approached it, but I think there's some juice there for practitioners to help take your practice much further. So I do hope that people will reflect on those things.
Well, I hope so too. I have to say, I just loved the book. It was, I mean, you said about how, I think sometimes how, it wasn't a revolution, like Nagarjuna wasn't a revolution the way we think of it now, right? And that was an evolution at the time, and same with the Sangha and Vasubandhu and so forth. But I think that process is continuing right into this very minute. And a little bit, I see this book in that tradition, because what they were doing and going back to the Buddha is responding to what are the belief systems of the day. And one thing we didn't talk a lot about, because I think even probably most of our audience isn't particularly familiar with, is modern philosophy, and modern philosophy about what is mind and what is consciousness. It's I told you before we started this talk that inquiry is what led me to Buddhism originally.
Yeah.
And you are speaking directly to, I think, the main schools of thought in our culture behind that. And the most pernicious one is materialism. It's funny. It's sometime, I can't remember, 1920s or 1930s, we went from scientists who actually had quite strong spiritual beliefs, and suddenly everything is physical. And I think when you talk about all these things that scientific discoveries that could also be quite dangerous, I think it's because of the fundamental nihilism behind. And also, I don't think AI can produce a sentient anything as long as it's built upon the notion of it's a dumb physical universe of which consciousness is some kind of byproduct or accident or something like that. I think that's really unlikely. So I think what's great is that you really have discussed a lot of those things. And in the process, I believe that any modern reader, even if they're not familiar with that philosophy, will have an opportunity to challenge some of our hidden assumptions. And that was something I really loved about the book. It's called Into the Mirror, A Buddhist Journey Through Mind, Matter, and the Nature of Reality by Andy Karr, and the foreword by Matthieu Ricard. And well, I hope you'll consider coming again onto our podcast.
I'd love to.
It's been a delight. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. It's been a delight for me too. It's really a pleasure to have this conversation.
Thanks for listening. If you have enjoyed today's podcast, we like to invite you to continue the journey into the heart of enlightened mind at gomde.eu.